The first question that we have on here is, what types of questions will I be asked when I interview for a postdoc position at a university? And then really focusing on, are these going to be questions about past research, behavioral-based questions, or kind of leadership structure, that type of thing?
Okay, sure. So I think the answer to the question in general is yes. So all of the aspects of research, there may be questions about individuals' personality, just to get a feel for how a person might fit with the project or the program that they're applying to, what that fit would look like, and if that's what the PI of that program is looking for. So some of the questions that I wrote down that I would be interested in, and I've seen asked in the past. First is, what are your professional goals? So what would you be wanting to get from the position or from the opportunity, and be able to take that forward to the next step? So what can the program provide to the applicant, as well as there'll be questions the other way also. What can the applicant provide to the program? So kind of matching the two together. Along with that, a question would be, what is your interest in the program? So directly, what do you as an applicant or as a potential postdoc want to get from the program, and be able to take that to the next stage in the career? Be specific questions as far as what the project is. There'll be specific questions on the techniques and the capabilities, the experience that you have as an individual, that you've gained through your education, master's, postdoc, undergrad as well, any of the research experiences you've had to that point. What are those capabilities? What do you have to offer the program? And does that match with what the project is asking you to do? There'll certainly be questions on interpersonal interaction, certainly in a professional setting. How is that? How do you interact with others? How do you communicate? How do you handle conflict management? So if there's a situation in the lab where there's a lot of people, you're going to be busy doing your own thing. How do you interact with others who may be borrowing things or maybe not putting things back? Oftentimes I've asked the question, or heard the question asked, to state an example, a specific situation that you can think of in your experience that would exemplify how you would handle a particular situation. And oftentimes that gives an indication of how you would in the future, and how in the past you've handled those conflict situations. Other questions that would come along is time management. How do you manage your time? Are you organized? And how do you organize your day? How do you organize tasks and activities? Oftentimes in research and positions that we're in, it's a balance of how do you get everything done. Sometimes you have to extend the day. Other times you have to just simply prioritize and work through things, the hottest iron in the fire first, and then work on from there. So kind of come up with a plan of how you approach those sorts of things. So the questions that you could expect would be both on a science and a research side, as well as on a more personal behavioral area as well.
Thank you so much. Those are all really, really great points. For kind of a follow-up on this, what types of questions would you recommend the interviewee asking of the interviewers?
Okay.
There are, of course, follow-up questions on those as far as how the lab dynamics are, what's expected. But are there any in particular that you've really appreciated hearing the interviewee ask, or that you found were more successful in the long-term compatibility with the lab?
Yeah, in general, answer to that question is, I appreciate the thoughtful questions of looking into the future of how does the if the person recognizes needs that they would have or scenarios that they would like to see in order to be successful, asking questions around that. So, as an example, a question would be how many individuals are in the lab? Postdocs, undergrads, other grad students. How do they share time? Is there limited space? Where would your office be? I mean, what are the dynamics, as you mentioned, what are the dynamics of the lab that you go into? Really, I appreciate those thoughtful questions of looking into the future and having a vision for what it would take for you as a fresh postdoc coming into a lab, or maybe a second postdoc, whatever it might be, whatever the position. What's it going to take for you to be successful? Those kinds of questions are always appreciated, and I think it shows some maturity in your thinking as you are looking to the next step.
Great, thank you. So Rebecca, are you able to hear us now and join in?
I am. I can hear you now. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties.
Oh, that's all right. That's kind of how it goes. So would you mind really quickly just introducing yourself, and then if you had anything else to add to this first question?
Absolutely. Just a little bit about myself briefly. I am with Bayer. I'm a senior recruiter. I've been here almost, gosh, going on 8 years. It's been a fantastic experience. Prior to that, I spent my time in agency doing some corporate recruiting, as I am now, but as well as consulting for various companies across the United States. So I've had the opportunity to live in many different cities, and it's just working for Bayer and having that opportunity to work with so many great people, as well as meet so many fantastic candidates. It's something that I really enjoy doing.
Awesome, thanks. And then did you have anything else that you would like to add for that first question of what types of questions will be asked, or if there's anything that you like to be asked?
Well, I think Kevin did a fantastic job of really summing everything up right there. In terms of questions, I really think can you hear me still?
We can. There is just a little bit of feedback. So again, for anyone that joined recently, if you can mute on your side as long as you aren't speaking, and then we'll open it up at the end for question session. But for now, if we could have people mute when they're not talking, it'll help with the sound quality. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic. Well, I think Kevin touched on the technical side, and again, on the behavioral side, we are going to be asking those behavioral-based questions. And I think it's important as you're prepping for an interview to understand you're going to want to use the STAR method, which, providing the situation, what did you specifically do, not as a group, but you specifically do to complete that task? What action did you take? And really share those results with the interviewer. So I think that's something that's very important. And from the perspective of good questions to ask, I think about team dynamics, because you want to make sure, as much as we, Bayer, or any organization is interviewing you, you're also interviewing them. You want to make sure that it's a good team dynamic, it's someplace where you want to work. So I think those are wonderful questions. Also, many times you can ask if they can give you a tour of the facility or the lab, if that's already not on your schedule. So those are very good questions to ask.
Zara, you're muted.
Thanks, Brittany. So then kind of elaborating on that and building, what kind of specific qualities are you looking for, both academic and then also within industry? And then would you like to have the candidate be showcasing more their skills or personality traits, or a combination of both?
I can start off with this question. I think for an employer, they're looking for two things. They're looking not only for those technical skills, which are so important to have, that you really do want to showcase those, what you have done in the past, what you can do for your current employer. So those are two very different things, or two things that you really should showcase. But also, we are looking for, and I can share this, a lot of times we want somebody that has the ability to think through and manage, as Kevin said, their time, and manage through complexity as well. Somebody that can plan and align their work to ensure they're meeting deadlines. Also, folks that have the ability to collaborate and partner well with others. And again, driving for results is very important. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of things it's kind of along the same line. So as far as the skills or the personality traits, the answer to that is both. Both are very important. As far as qualities that I would look for, and many employers do, is you want to have somebody that demonstrates organization. So that, like you say, being able to manage their time, that they're able to get things done in a prioritized manner, thinking through the process. I want somebody who's reliable. Oftentimes that's going to come through reference checks, and to get that perspective from somebody that knows the person, dedication to a particular task, or willingness to kind of work through the tough times, being able to demonstrate that in some way. I want somebody who is self-motivated, that's dedicated, interested, sincere, and dedicated to whatever they do. So those are key, I think, requirements in order to be successful in science and in many professions across the spectrum.
Thank you. So then going into that, how can we best prepare for those? Of course, there's researching the lab that you're interested in, and then trying to prepare for these kind of questions that you guys have been talking about, as far as even looking at organization and enthusiasm. Should you be prepared to talk about what motivates you through your career? And then how can you best facilitate reaching out to those professors and industry postings that are going on? Should you try to do that prior to the interview? Do you have any advice on those?
Well, I guess I'll jump in first on this one. One thing that I very much appreciate when I have positions available that I'm interviewing for is when individuals who are truly interested in the position actually reach out and call me or email me, but usually a call is best. Sometimes if you email, it's pretty easy to overlook an email and to set it aside. But if you actually call and get them on the phone, it's more direct. I mean, you have them without any distractions, I guess, at that point, and ask them the question to show and be able to demonstrate your sincere interest. I can share another approach that worked for me the first time. If you're local and close to your employer that you're interested in, hand deliver your resume, hand deliver your application papers. Walk in and just have a short conversation and express interest in the job. And I think that goes a long way. And I certainly appreciate that when somebody takes that time and is willing to check in, shows some dedication and sincere interest.
So if they're not local, would you be interested in someone reaching out and asking if they could do a Zoom session with you, so that you could have a little face-to-face time and they could ask you some questions about their fit for the position? Yeah,
with the changing times of technologies as we're participating in here today, yes, I think that would be fine. Sometimes it's a challenge to find the time for that, but it's really no different than a phone call if it's organized up front. To look face to face might be a nice touch. Mhm.
Thank you. And then Rebecca, did you have anything you'd like to add for this one?
Um, just a little bit. It might be a little bit different from the industry side in the sense that you do need to apply online, but oftentimes it's wonderful if a candidate can look up, for instance, if you're interested in Bayer, look up, find out who the recruiter is on Bayer, or make a connection with one of the recruiters and reach out. Let them know that you're interested in a specific position and see if they can connect you with the manager or somebody else within the organization so that they can do a call and at least share about the company. Because oftentimes if I have students, whether they're PhD students who reach out, or even folks that have been in the industry for 10 years or more, I'll spend some time if they reach out to share what I know about Bayer, why it's great to work here, and try to connect them with somebody within the field of science so that they can ask some really great questions. So I think that's that's something that I would recommend doing. So try to find out who the recruiter is or connect with the recruiter on LinkedIn so you actually have that connection.
That's a really great recommendation for finding more resources that you can utilize prior to the interview. And then coming back, this seems to be kind of a common theme that graduate students are interested in. And also I would say most people that are applying for jobs, there's always that question of how to describe moments of failure or conflict. And we all know it's coming. So in this situation, how do we spin this? Is it best to create more of a positive spin? Is it better to, really lay it out there and show that maybe it wasn't a good situation, but you've learned from it and grown, maybe a combination of both of them? And then what if all of your examples that you can come up with don't necessarily highlight your personal strengths? How do you approach those situations, or what have you seen that's been successful or has been less successful in interviews?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start out with that. That's one of the questions. We always have that in a behavioral-based question. And the first thing I would say is please always be honest. During your answer, if you could try to strike a balance of thinking of something that you struggle with, but that you are working on to improve. For example, maybe you're not a strong public speaker, but you've recently volunteered to run meetings, which shows that you're trying to grow self-development and you're becoming more comfortable when addressing a crowd. Also, if, for instance, you give a specific example and it doesn't put you in the best of light, always share with your interviewer what you learned from that situation and how going forward you're applying that. I think that's the most important, because there are going to be those questions, and just show that it was a learning experience and how you're applying that knowledge going forward. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are ditto on that. So the first word that I put down was honesty, and that's what you started with as well. And I think that's key. You want to be humble with where you are at this point in time. Though it might sound kind of unique, but it shows a little bit of vulnerability. It shows that you're human. But the key, as you said, it's important to show that you recognized it, you learned from it, you're growing, and you're moving on. You want to see that progression and that potential for or a willingness to recognize that and grow from it and develop into the future. So I think we're right on par on both of those. Yeah.
Great. To follow up on that just a little bit, so you both have focused on more of the attitude towards it. Are there maybe certain failures or conflicts that you actually view as a good thing when they're brought up, that maybe it's a better example of growth within a company or a lab structure, or are there things that really should be avoided?
Do you have any ideas, Rebecca? I'm not sure how to address that.
That's a really good question. In terms of, that's a really good question. Now you're interviewing me. I'm trying to think about that.
We can circle back around to that towards the end. I just thought it would be a nice thing to elaborate on maybe a little bit. So why don't we come back to that towards the end in our open session. So then going back to preparedness, what should you bring with you to an interview? It's a kind of basic one.
Yeah, so I'll throw a couple of ideas out there that I wrote down. The first one is a positive attitude, a sense of being happy to be there, interested in the program, interested in the opportunity, and the job that you're applying for. Though they're going to have copies of the documentation that you submitted, you could take a copy or two with you as well, just in case somebody needs one. And that may also serve as a reference for you as well. A sincere interest in the position. I mean, you don't want to go into an interview and in any way give the sense that you're just there to take up time and just for the experience of the interview, which, many people will do that. And I think that it's, as long as the position is close to what you might be interested in, doing interviews, even if it may not be your dream job, they're worth doing. It's great experience, but certainly don't give the perception that you're just there for that purpose. You want to make sure it's sincere. You want to be confident. So with that positive attitude that you take in, you want to be confident with what you have, what you bring to the table, and that you can be a positive team player or positive part of the program that you're going to be a part of. So just go in with that positive attitude, a positive, confident position, and with lots of questions and interest in what's going on. So I think that's probably the best thing that you can do when you go to an interview.
All right, I agree with everything that Kevin has said. I do recommend that folks just to bring a notepad, pen, just in case you want to jot down some notes about what you're learning, as well as really great interview questions or questions to ask your interviewer, because this isn't just a time where we want to learn about you. You also need to learn about us to make sure that we're going to be the right fit for you. So ask those questions, have questions really targeted for your audience, for your HR when you meet with HR. Ask those questions about compensation. And I know we're getting a little ahead of myself. I know that's one of our questions. Ask about benefits, paid time off. We really want to answer all of those questions for you because we want to make sure you feel comfortable. And also for the hiring manager, ask him about growth, him or her about growth. Oftentimes you're going to get to meet with the team itself. Ask them what they like about working there, how long they've been there. So just ask lots of questions because, again, I can't stress this enough. You need to make sure this is the right opportunity for you as well.
Thank you for those. So then, yes, that does segue quite nicely into our next question. When is the appropriate time to address salary benefits in an interview?
Can I answer that one, Kevin, or did you?
Sure, yeah, jump right in.
Is that all right? Only because typically when I'm doing my initial phone interview with a candidate, I'm going to talk about it right away with the candidate because I need to understand, our package that we might offer this candidate if they go through our process, is it going to be the right package for the candidate? So I do not mind any questions about salary, benefits. I will walk you through everything. I want to just give you as much information as possible before you walk on site. Also, when you're on site, if you meet with another HR person, you can certainly ask them additional questions. And if you're working with a company that doesn't work in this manner, save those questions for the HR. Typically, a hiring manager is not going to answer any questions around salary. They always defer that over to their HR folks. Kevin,
Okay.
what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I certainly wouldn't be too overzealous in asking that question too early in the process. If it's not brought up as you described in your process, where you just are very upfront and talk about it at the beginning. Some interviews that you'll go to, it won't be the first thing talked about. And in many interviews, it really should be part of the process, but I guess I would recommend allowing the interview team or your interview committee, panel, however you refer to that, to bring that up first. And then later on in the process, toward the end, if there's a chance to ask questions, you can go ahead and ask it at that point. You don't want to give the impression that you're just there for the money, though it's an important part of it, but just wait and be patient. Oftentimes it'll come up and the opportunity will present itself to ask that question.
So it sounds like really reading the room on that one is important.
It is, yeah.
And if I could just add one more item about the salary piece. One thing that I think all candidates should know is you do not need to disclose your current salary. So from a best practice standpoint, most companies are not going to ask you that question, only because there's certain states that do not allow us to ask that question. So I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware of that. And I think from a candidate perspective, that really helps you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's a very valuable piece of advice. For those that are interested in learning more about how to address salary or benefits, we will be doing a negotiation seminar. So that will be our next webinar series, and that will be on March 26th. So if you're interested in negotiation skills, do please join us for that as well. And then going back, this circles back around to that Zoom question. So many interviews now are done via Zoom. It alleviates travel and all of that. So what is the best way to utilize that resource? And what tips do you have for making a distance interview successful? Of course, at this point, it's a little bit harder to go around and do lab tours or company tours and really meet and get that idea of a group dynamic. So what do you have for recommendations on those virtual interviews?
Well, I'll jump in with that one first with some thoughts, and it's kind of a timely question as far as the last 2 days I've conducted 6. They weren't Zoom, but they were WebEx interviews with candidates. They work very well. It's a very nice way to be able to interact with the candidate rather than just hearing a voice over a phone call. Suggestions I would have is just to ensure that the connection will work and that you have all of the pieces in place for the connection. The 2 international interviews that we did, we tested those a week ago, just made sure that the system was going to work. It did. It proved perfectly fine during the actual interview with the committee. So make sure the system works. Be relaxed with it. Also understand that even though you're not in the same room, they're able to see what you're doing. So try not to have unnecessary movements or activity, whatever it might be. They can see what you're doing, and just like you can see what they're doing. Be relaxed with it. Kind of try to be in the mindset that you really are in the room, and in a sense you are. So don't treat it as if you're at a distance. Be relaxed. Carry on conversations as you would if you were in the room. Just make it as natural as possible. trying to think if there was anything else. Yeah, I think it's just test the connection, be patient, and act and be natural as if you were there. So, any other thoughts, Rebecca?
Well, for me, I would ask that when I'm speaking with candidates from an industry perspective, dress like you're actually going to an interview just from the waist up.
Sure.
That's something because it is an interview. For your video connection, try to be in a room that's not terribly distracting. If you have posters in the background, we're not talking pictures, posters that are questionable, please take those down. Remember that you are on a video conference. If you have any pets or dogs, this just recently happened to me. A fellow had a dog and it kept visiting, and I love dogs. However, he wanted to know if he could just get up for a second and put the dog into another room. Absolutely fine. Problem was, he didn't realize that he's on a video. He didn't have any pants on. So remember that I can see you, and just remember, clear your surroundings. Also, if you need to use notes for your interview, absolutely have notes. Don't rely on them too heavily. If you need to take some notes in the interview, just let the person you're interviewing with, hey, I'm taking some notes. That shows some interest. So that's just a little bit about it. Are you still, Kevin, laughing about my interview? I pretended like I didn't see a thing. So yes, so that's just remember your surroundings.
That is some excellent advice. And I do think that that was really nice to add that you should mention if you're taking notes, because I have to take a lot of classes remotely, and it is a little hard to tell if I'm actually working on course-related stuff or not. So I think that is a very good point as far as just making sure that they know what you're doing and that you're not distracted. And so then coming up with kind of on that is not prepared, how to deal with questions that you're not prepared for or situations that may arise that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, so I put down 2 words for the answer to that question, and the first one was calmly. Just take them in stride, and thoughtfully. Don't rush into an answer. If you're not prepared for it, take an opportunity to hesitate and think about the question, formulate a good answer, and then come back with that and just show. And really, I think what it does is it allows the committee to get a feel of how you handle stress, things that you're not prepared for. Because in life, in research, and in a job, things are going to pop up. Surprises are going to happen. So how do you handle those? So it's a really great way to show and highlight that characteristic, that ability to handle the unknown. And if you do it gracefully, thoughtfully, and carefully, all will go well.
I think Kevin is spot on with his answer. Absolutely. And the only thing or 2 items that I might add is, if you're not really sure about that question, what you can do is break it down, and you can also ask the interviewer to repeat the question. And they're always happy to do that. And you can always say, that's a really good question. Could I please have a moment to think about it? And any interviewer is going to give that candidate that time to really think about it, break the question down, and be able to respond. And again, going back to what Kevin says, it just shows how you respond in a challenging or difficult situation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So then this can kind of tie back in with some of the questions that were either more successful or less successful, or maybe some of those conflicts and that sort of thing. But could you share maybe some more things that interviewees have done that either were really great or either disappointed or dissuaded you from pursuing them as a candidate for the position?
Okay, sure. So one of the things that I put down, and what I really appreciate, is having a sense that the applicant did some background research, understands the company, the program, the university, if that's the case, the region as well. If there are questions, if the individual has kids, asking about the school system, really covering all the bases, showing that that they have put some sincere and good thought into the position. Is it right for them? Is it all going to provide that person, their family, whatever the scenario may be, what they need? So just having that thought. A vision for the future. Where is this going? So if we're thinking of a postdoc position, as many of the grad students here on the call are going to be doing, ideally, where is this going to go? Where do you want it to take you? And how is it going to get you where you need to be? I think that's something that's really impressed me. I'll give an example. It was a year ago. I was on a search committee, and we have a question of where do you see yourself in 5 years from now? What experiences or what do you see yourself doing? And the person answered that question as they envisioned themselves in 5 years enjoying the experience that they've had in the job that they were applying for and moving it forward, or to something along that line at the end. But having that positive response of expecting to enjoy what they're doing and what they're applying for, that stuck out and struck me, and it's something that I will remember for quite some time. It was just very well done, I thought. Rebecca?
Thank you. Kevin, again, was spot on. Around company goals, people that really impress me are really able to go and also make it personal. So they talk specifically about, I'm personally drawn to the mission because, and they give a reason why, or I really believe in this approach. And share an example or two that really, I think, helps and ties back that you did your research and why you would be a good fit for the position. Also, another question that often we ask you would be, why should we hire you? And this really is your opportunity to sell yourself. This is your time to summarize, what you can do for the company, how you deliver great results, as well as how you're going to fit in from a cultural fit within the group. And that's something that's really important to do. So when you have that question, if you could tie all three of those pieces in there, I think that's going to make you very successful.
Thank you. Those are some great pieces of advice. So looking at maybe things that the applicant is very passionate, they have a lot of intention, they really are committed to this position in the company or the university, the program that they're working with, but it's made very clear that they'll need to either acquire some technical skills or they're lacking them. How, as an applicant, do you navigate this? And as the interviewers, are you willing to hire an applicant that's lacking technical skills, particularly if they really express that they have the desire to learn it and are willing to learn, or is that something that could be a deal breaker for you?
Go ahead, Rebecca, and then I'll follow on.
All righty. From an industry's perspective, oftentimes, I'll be honest with you, it's going to be a deal breaker. If there's a specific technical skill that you do need to have, oftentimes, if it's required, that applicant is going to have that. Oftentimes, what we do, if we see somebody that might be lacking in a specific technical area, we may open a position, maybe it could be at a lower level, where we could bring this person in and train them so they can eventually move into that role. But oftentimes we are hiring for the specific, whether it's education with years of experience and technical knowledge.
Yeah.
So for you, if that does happen, would you want the applicant, if you said, I'm sorry, we need these technical skills, would you want the applicant to follow up and ask if there was a similar position where they could learn the skills and then advance throughout your company?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are many people that I've been doing this at Bayer for almost 8 years. So there are obviously there's applicants that have applied and interviewed that I've not been able to place within the company. But I still keep in touch with those folks, and if there is something that is a good fit or they see, I will match them immediately with the hiring manager. And they can stay in touch with me. They can ask me questions. I've actually had some of our folks who came in that did internships. They went back to school, but if they see something of interest, they call me about those positions, or if they even just want to do a mock interview. So I'm happy to stay in touch with any applicant. And I think it's valuable to stay in touch with your HR person because we can really help you along the process. Even if it's not the right role for you, we can oftentimes help you get you to the right place. And then what are your thoughts?
Yep, so I would agree with that. And ideally, I think that this scenario would hopefully not happen very often because many times in the job applications, maybe more so for faculty or other positions, sometimes the postdoc positions are a little more relaxed in how the skill set is stated in the application. But oftentimes, if a particular skill is not there, and that will be evident from the application materials as well as the cover letter, then it probably won't make it to the point of an interview. But that being said, if it does happen, then and expressing an interest in being willing to learn, showing that us to learn the process or learn the skill and move on from there, I think that's perfectly fine. Asking questions about that skill, showing a true interest in that. What is it? How does it work? If you really want to learn about that, carry on a conversation, and I think that goes a long way to maybe swaying a decision. But in the end, it may not be enough if that skill is, depending on how critical the skill is.
Right. Yeah, thank you for giving advice on how to potentially sway that as well. And then kind of on that note of the just requirements and when do you really fit the requirements? When there is a specific year limit for experience, one thing that people may not really incorporate as much as the graduate school experiences, or they might not feel comfortable counting that as years of experience. Do you think that graduate school experiences count for years of experience, even if it isn't maybe a true industry position?
Okay, I'll take a quick stab at that one first. And my first inclination is yes. It depends on how closely the experience aligns with the specific job that you're applying for. And one of I just mentioned briefly a moment ago about the cover letter, and I think that how you describe your experiences, all the way from the beginning, when you begin your research career, whether it's an undergrad, grad, and beyond, how you describe that and explain it in your cover letter, trying to demonstrate that you have the skills for the particular position, will maybe sway or allow the hiring committee, to make that call either way. So I think that how you present it and show that you feel that your experiences during your undergrad or grad career do apply, I think that's important, and it certainly would allow for those years to be counted in the total.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. For us at Bayer, we do count your years of experience as long as it's relevant to that particular position, and most of the time it is. Typically, we're going to incorporate any kind of graduate master's degree work as well as PhD work towards years of experience. Most of the time, folks that are in a bachelor's program really are not in a paid position doing research.
Mm-hmm.
So it's typically that master's and graduate experience. So for instance, if we require a PhD plus 2 years of relevant experience, or even 4 or 6, oftentimes you're going to get that 2 years in your master's program and 4 years in your PhD. And I would take all of that and count that towards years of experience.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then that has wrapped up all of our more focused questions. We have a little bit of time left. I was wondering if before we open the floor for questions from the audience, do you have any just kind of final take-home messages or advice that you would recommend that maybe we haven't covered yet?
Well, for me, I think we've done a very good job of covering everything, but I would just reiterate, be prepared, do your research, go to your interview and have good questions to ask the interview team, be confident and positive.
Yeah. So a couple of things to add to that is I think when you go into an interview, try to anticipate questions. Think about questions that you would expect them to ask and have answers to those questions formulated ahead of time. Be as prepared as you can. That's a part of that. The other part that I would suggest or would comment on is, again, the cover letter. That's the first impression that the committee will likely have of you. I think it needs to be done without error. It has to be very clear, succinct. You don't want to go on and on and on about various points, but you want to be complete and make sure that it demonstrates your qualifications. And if in fact a position has a number of required elements and even some of the preferred elements, do as much as possible to address those in the cover letter, because that's how oftentimes a committee is going to be evaluating candidates. Is they'll have a table that has names on the left-hand side and those qualifications across the top, and they're going to give a score. And it's pretty difficult for committees to do that if those particular points are not addressed within the letter or the CV. Somewhere it needs to be stated, so it helps the committee make the right decision for you. So those are a couple of important parts I think are good to keep in mind.
Thank you so much. So it does look like we have a couple questions in the chat. If anyone does have questions, please feel free to send those in as well. So some of the questions are focusing on industry maybe a little bit more, but one question is, why does the industry announce a position if they normally hire by recommendation? And why do they give more importance to work experience than degrees?
Two really good questions. Now, the first one, I guess, from an industry perspective, we do post our positions both internally and externally, but what do you mean by recommendation? Because what we do as a whole is look at the whole applicant pool, go through every applicant, look at their resume. And we do, if somebody does do an employee referral, we'll certainly look at that person because it's a known quantity or a known entity. So that might be why we would do that, but we do go through and we try to be very fair and equitable about the process.
Okay, great. And then while I have you, would you mind elaborating quickly on the STAR methods or where we can learn more about those?
Absolutely. The STAR method is where you're sharing you have a behavioral-based interview question. And I actually have a list of frequently asked questions that, Zara, if I could send to you, it talks about STAR as well.
That would be wonderful, and then we can share it.
If you don't mind sharing that, I thought it might be helpful. But with the STAR method, you're sharing with the interview team what the situation was, what did you specifically do in that situation, and what was the outcome. And the reason we do this is, from a behavioral perspective, if you acted one way in the past, you're most likely going to act that same way going forward. So we just basically want to have that opportunity to see how you would act in the future for our company. And I have that all outlined in my frequently asked questions.
Great. Thank you so much for being willing to share that. We will send that out to our graduate list as well. Kevin, what are some of the components that a committee will be looking for in the research statement? And this is primarily for a faculty application package.
All right, now I'm off mute. I'll answer that as assuming that it's the criteria, the required criteria as well as the preferred criteria, and some of those, would be having a PhD for a faculty position, having experience teaching. It may be as specific as a particular class, but just have X number of years of teaching experience. There may be examples of PCR, specific technologies, experience handling big data. Some positions have a lot of interaction with students and or producers, growers. So there may be criteria there saying, asking the candidates to demonstrate that they have experience speaking in front of diverse groups, as well as just specifically with producers and growers at field days or any sort of a scenario or setting. So those are some of the criteria that we would be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, we have a couple more questions for you. So there is a focus on how to have a successful interview coming from a postdoctoral position. And then the other one is it correct that the software programs do the first round of shortlisting? And if that is the case, how do you make sure that your application gets through those shortlisting programs?
Oh, those are really good questions. So for a postdoc, a postdoc position, you would be going, and I'm going to be using Bayer as a example, you would be going through the same application interview process as you would go through for any position that we have. You're going to be asked both technical questions as well as those behavioral-based questions. Now, oftentimes the twist here might be, oftentimes you have research that you've done, and we would want you to present on that research. And then there would be a question and answer after that. Am I getting all of that question, Zara?
I think so. And then, let's see, so we have kind of a question about the structure of the interviews. So when you go into the process and go through that, are you going to be interacting more with a hiring manager, an HR personnel, or?
Your point of contact is always going to be the HR person. So you're mostly going to be interacting with them throughout the process. They're your key point of contact. But once you get there for the day of the interview, your hiring manager is going to be your key point of contact. And typically what they'll do is they'll have you in one room, or there'll be multiple rounds of interviews. Typically they're going to provide lunch, which gives you a great time to ask those questions for team members. It's more relaxed. You can learn about the position as well.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up on all of these as they're coming in. One of the questions was how to balance the homework of researching the company or lab between asking the recruiter or interview to describe the company and lab. So how much of that should you know going in, and what types of questions should you ask even if you already know the answer?
Well, for those, when you're typically speaking with your HR person, I would ask HR related questions. Any questions should be focused is, again, know your audience. We're going to be the person to ask around corporate culture, benefits, vacation time, comp, benefits, anything you need there. Those are the types of questions. Lab related, I would ask those questions during your on-site interview.
Well, I'll add a quick comment on that as well to address the idea of, or the question of, if you've already done your homework, should you ask those questions anyway? And I think my answer would be yes, because though you've done your homework for whatever source you used for that, it may or may not be accurate, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, I think it's a good idea to say, you know, I did some research and I looked into this aspect. But could you elaborate and confirm that my thoughts are correct? I think that gives an indication that you've done your homework and that you're still interested and you want to make sure that it's correct. So there's nothing wrong with asking questions that you think you have the right answer to, just to confirm that you do.
Thank you. That's some great advice. So I think we're getting close to wrapping it up. Are there any other questions that we haven't covered, or that anyone else would like to ask?
I think, unless I missed it, Bree asked one about about the process of the interview. When do you interact with the hiring manager versus like the HR recruiter? Pardon me if you already got to that, but it looked like.
No, typically your first point of contact will be with the recruiter. And from there, the next step is to meet with the hiring manager on site. And if you are, for instance, if the position is in St. Louis and you might live in Iowa, oftentimes the hiring manager might do a Skype interview prior to flying you in. Does that?
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Does that help?
Yeah, that was great.
We have another question that we have two more questions that came in so far, but could you both elaborate, and this may be very similar or there may be differences between academia and industry, but could you please explain more about short-term and long-term research plan requirements, how much you want to see coming in from the interviewee on kind of preparedness for that, or if it's going to be more establishing that as they go?
So the question is related to short and long-term research experience, is that?
Research plan requirements. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that what they're asking is as far as when they're joining the program and they're looking at the research planning for both short-term and then long-term research goals.
Right.
I think they would like to know more about kind of the requirement on those. Is there usually a shorter term and longer term goal, or what do you expect them to have prepared for the interview?
Yeah, oftentimes, in fact, it's a question we asked in these interviews the last couple of days is, in coming into a program, if you're setting it up, we were asking, what are your visions? What's your goal and objectives for the program that you're being considered for? And then what would you do in the first year? When you hit the ground, what are you going to do? I think that's probably a minimum. You should know at least what you're going to do when you get there. And then the next is, within 5 to 10 years, where would you see the program having advanced? So this is for a faculty position. I think for a postdoc, maybe they're within the first 6 months to a year, and then 3 years in, where do you see yourself? Or where do you want to see yourself in your career within 5 years. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. Rebecca, could a senior postdoc apply for a research associate position in an industry position?
Absolutely. Absolutely, you can do that. And oftentimes we hire our postdocs, and I understand, and we do going to be shameless right now. We do have postdoc positions. So if you want to learn about them, you can email me. Shameless plug. But for those positions, we bring those folks in for 2 years and we want to grow and develop them. And at the end of that time, our hope is that they're going to apply for other positions and they're going to want to stay with Bayer. They're going to see that they've gained really good knowledge. They're going to see the value of being at Bayer and see where they can grow in their career.
Do you think that individuals that do a postdoc with a company first are in a better position for negotiating their next position within the company?
When you mean negotiating, because in most companies, if you're interested in a position, you do have to apply for it. Even if
sorry, to clarify on that, negotiating as far as maybe coming in at a higher position or a higher level.
They would have to apply to a higher position or a higher level. A position would have to come available, and anybody within an organization has to apply for it and go through an interview process. Because we want to, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Does it give them a leg up though?
It does, because we know of their work. They understand how Bayer works, and they understand the culture. So absolutely. Absolutely, a postdoc is huge because most companies, because you're still considered a full-time employee, any company wants to. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Did we have any other final questions? Looks like we have one more that just came in. If a potential PhD comes in for an interview and answers the 5-year question as working in the industry, does that affect your decision to take them on in an academic position?
Absolutely not. From my perspective, I think that, my view and I think many faculty would view this the same way, that the postdoc is an opportunity to develop an individual's skills. And whatever, a postdoc position is a temporary position. It should be temporary. And whatever that individual's desire is beyond the postdoc is perfectly fine. The key for the program that they're applying to or that we might be referring to is, as long as the goals and objectives of that project for that program is accomplished, that's what the program wants. But at the same time, we want those same professional and personal development activities to happen as well, so that the individual can move on through their career. So it's just a opportunity to assist, and as long as both elements, both parts of that puzzle gain, I think it's a plus. It's a win-win.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and for all of your help. You have given some really great advice, and I think personally I can say that it was very helpful, both thinking about interviewing as well as just current positions and really the whole structure. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.